Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Erica Niebrick, and I'll be your moderator for this session of Driving Government Efficiency and Security with Zero Trust and Infrastructure Modernization. At this time, I would like to turn things over to our presenter for today. Francis, the floor is all yours.
Thanks very much, and thank you for joining us today. Welcome to Driving Government Efficiency and Security with Zero Trust and Infrastructure Modernization, presented by Versa and Booz Allen Hamilton. The Department of Defense says it's on track for full implementation of Zero Trust by fiscal year 2027, the deadline that it set for itself. Randy Resnick, the director of the Pentagon's Zero Trust Portfolio Management Office, says Thunderdome at the Defense Information Systems Agency has a, quote, perfect 152 out of 152 in meeting the department's Zero Trust goals. On this program, you'll meet two of the industry leaders that help get Thunderdome to that perfect score, what it means for the future of security at DoD, and how the Thunderdome model can make Zero Trust achievable for civilian agencies too. And you heard Erica mention questions. We welcome those throughout the course of the conversation. We're not going to reserve a special question time for the end. I'll incorporate those questions throughout the conversation with the two folks that you're about to meet. So please feel free to send those in starting right away if you would like to do so. It's my pleasure now to introduce Michael Lundberg, Vice President of Zero Trust Solutions for Booz Allen Hamilton, and Jonathan Taylor, Director and Principal of Security at Versa. Gentlemen, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. Michael, I want to start with you. 152 out of 152 is pretty impressive for Thunderdome. What's the genesis of the Thunderdome program? How is Booz involved with it, and what was the goal that you set for yourself and that DISA set for you to build Thunderdome out?
Yeah, sure. No, I appreciate that. Yeah, so it's been a journey with Thunderdome, working with DISA hand in hand. It started out as a prototype OTA a few years back. The goals that DISA was trying to set were how to really advance their cybersecurity modernization activities as well as their network infrastructure modernization. And so there was a number of different technology areas that they were really focused on. How do we evolve from the traditional networking stacks, centralized security solutions, to a distributed zero trust architecture? And from that, we successfully delivered a set of commercial technologies that got integrated into the existing technologies that DISA had today, and really showed that these new modern solutions were going to help them achieve the zero trust architecture. So that then turned into a production OTA, which is allowing us to not only deliver these new technologies within DISA and the fourth estate agencies, but they set up Thunderdome as an overarching contract vehicle that's allowing their mission partners to be able to leverage that contract vehicle to get these same technologies into their environments as well.
Was there significance to the fact that you were using commercial technologies to deliver this capability?
For sure, yeah. So, I think the biggest thing right now is organizations really need to get out of the traditional way of looking at networking and cybersecurity. The original, 10, 20-year-old mindset of, hey, I need very large ASIC-driven, hardware-specific solutions. What's coming out in the commercial industry today is, from a software capability set, is by far greater than anything that we could have thought through in 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so really embracing that new tech and being able to introduce that is not only driving the capabilities that the DoD needs, but also driving down and creating efficiencies for them.
And it's not just, I imagine, the technology that is new and innovative, the fact that the technology is commercial, but the mechanism by which the department was able to get it through the OTA, it's a hot acquisition vehicle. Yes. What did that mean for the capability you were able to deliver, and maybe the timeline you were able to deliver it on too?
Yeah, so it's a good point. The OTA really allowed us to drive that effectiveness and efficiency and get that tech into the production environments at a pace that I haven't seen in my time in the industry. And so that really allowed us to not only demonstrate these new technologies could be effective, right, and drive down costs, but we've been able to really scale that out. Mm-hmm. We have over 14 mission partners right now that we're helping deliver this tech to today under the Thunderdome vehicle, and over the last 2 years, the number of individuals and organizations that we've been able to affect has been pretty incredible.
There's a couple of things there I want to come back to later in the conversation. JT, welcome. It's great to have you here too.
Thanks, sir.
One of the things that I think is most telling about Thunderdome is that I've had in my conversations with technology leaders in the civilian agencies, a number of people say to me, I want to get some of that too. And I wonder what your role is and what your view is of how civilian agencies can at least apply the same model, if not the actual technology itself.
So one of the big things, right, I think about Thunderdome was it was all about consolidation and modernization, right? So what Michael kind of what was talking about and basically collapsing a lot of different vendors, right, roughly into just a couple, right? You know, 2 or 3 vendors across the board to be able to bring this infrastructure together. It was a cost savings initiative, and so look, it's no secret, right? Doge came through, they cut everybody's budgets. There's $1 billion budgets down to $1 million budgets, $1 million budgets down to hundreds of thousands of dollar budgets, and there's still an edict out there that says we still have to grow our capabilities while being able to maintain what we currently have from a security posture, from a network resiliency, things of that nature as well. But yeah, you got to do it on cheap, right? So we have to actually look at a different either technology, or we have to figure out how do we go further with what we have and do more with less, or however we want to call it. So the whole point, like I said, coming back to Thunderdome, was being able to take that massive architecture and really modernize it, but also cut a lot of cost with that. And so can a civilian agency adopt the Thunderdome model? Absolutely, it can. And can it do it with a cheaper cost that's associated to that? Absolutely too. So being able to see how many vendors were originally in the original architecture, and then being able to take that architecture, drive it to only a few vendors, be able to bring that to our customers, save them money, increase their capabilities that goes along with it, because here's the modernization aspect. You're using 10-year-old technology a lot of times with what this originally had. And so now they're using today's modern next-gen technology. So being able to provide security, being able to integrate that in with the network, be able to provide zero trust. I run on a platform, it's called visibility as security. It's not being able to block a threat. It's not being able to block a user or segment of user. Visibility allows me to see the IOC. It allows me to see the threat that's actually in my environment. And so being able to consolidate all of these products into a platform, and then being able to deliver that at a lower cost, right? Because I'm not having to buy 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different platforms. I'm buying one. And then also looking at, okay, what do I need to do for my operational expense over top of this? Because now I'm having, one solution give me my visibility, decrease false positives, increase, my true positives, increase my true negatives, so I'm not having the white noise that I got to go trace down at the end of the day. That is huge. So from a civilian agency, this is, I would call it almost perfect Zen, right? Because it's like, look, I don't have the budget any longer, so now I got to look at my current solution. Where's my renewals? Am I going to have to go without support, or do I have to pull certain things out of my network, or even from an operational expense, right? Do I have people, right? So that's the number one thing. If I can't pull it out of technology, I got to pull it from people. And so looking at civilian agencies and kind of helping them, from an operational expense on that is actually huge. And so yes, to answer the question in a very short realm, yes, absolutely, they can consume it in the entirety that Thunderdome really is, or they can take points and pieces of it to modernize their network and also build themselves pretty much a grow plan, right? So they can just consume it, as they see fit.
He not only answered the first question, he also answered part of the second question too, which is going to be, what does an agency do, given that every civilian agency leader that I talk to, a CIO, CISO, whatever, we're already working on zero trust. So if they're already down that path and they see the Thunderdome solution as kind of a holy grail to get to, how do you evaluate what you have? And you talked about looking at expiration of contracts that are already in place and capabilities that are already in place. But what are the other pieces of that to determining then what you need to do to move in the Thunderdome direction?
So I will say there's not a silver bullet for this at all, right? Each customer is going to be different.
Sure.
So some generic aspects you would do is, number one, evaluate your technology stack. Number one, how old is it? And I'm not saying that age equals, something that could be bad or however it is, but is it older, right? Am I paying more for, whether it be bare metal, you talked about the ASICs, right, and so forth, having this big monolithic bare metal platform, right? How much does it cost to maintain said platform? So you got to start looking at, my age of my equipment and the features that are available, within my solution, from a network, from security, from whatever, right, that is really there. And you got to start also, right, those expiration contracts. So you got to understand too, it's like, if I've got 3 years left on a 5-year contract, I'm probably not going to get rid of something. So I got to understand, where would a rollout methodology be at the end of the day? So from an adoption standpoint, can they do it? Yes. Do they have to adopt it all at one point in time? Potentially not. Mm-hmm. If they can adopt it all at one point in time, great, right? That's Zen, right? You can come in full modernized solution. But if you can't, you also, like I said, you have to kind of go back and kind of piece together, okay, what can I adopt today? What do I want to move to? What's my 1, 3, and 5-year plan? Knowing where my budgets are going to be, not just this year, but also being able to calculate, with government cuts, things of that nature over the course of the next few years, mm-hmm. right? Until maybe we get another administration, right? Maybe we continue with something similar that we have. We don't know what's going to go past that. So we have to plan, right, for that, for the next couple of years at the bare minimum, understanding, hey, what can I adopt with less money?
There were two things that you said earlier on that I wanted to follow up on, Michael. You talked about the speed at which the solution was deployed and the scale at which you're able to use it. Yeah. I talked to Randy Resnick, I mentioned him earlier in the beginning, and I talked to him at TechNet Cyber, and I teased him a little bit because he was very triumphantly discussing the success that Thunderdome had in reaching all that 152 out of 152. And he said, yeah, people told me when we first announced that it was going to be fiscal 27 for full compliance, you'll never do it. And here was 2 years early, essentially saying, we did it. What do you think are the markers along that trail that you saw or that DISA saw that said, yeah, we're going to make it, that the folks that JT's talking about at civilian agencies could also look for to see whether they're on the right path if they want to pick up the gauntlet here?
Yeah, that's a good question. And to kind of address that and pick up a little bit of what JT was saying, right, I think most organizations, when they come to us to talk about, hey, how can we leverage Thunderdome, how can we get these pieces, right, is really wanting us to assess where they are today, mm-hmm. what technologies they already have, because the whole goal of Thunderdome originally wasn't to rip and replace and to build out end-to-end, right? No organization has the budget or the funding to do that, right? So the goal was, how can we have an architecture that can plug and play with your existing solutions, integrate with your ICAM, with your endpoint EDR, right? And leverage those technologies to provide that end-to-end solution. So on Thunderdome, a lot what we were initially doing was filling those large gap areas that really had to be modernized while keeping some of that other technologies that were in place and already in their own growth path. They already had lifetime left or were already in a modernization state, and really focusing on that integration state. We worked with Versa, was working with other vendors to do custom integrations so that we didn't have to deploy secondary agents or deploy additional tech that we didn't have to. So it started out there, right? Where do we have to really fill in? Then the integration piece and making sure that we were tightly integrated. And then it was filling in the smaller pieces that really drove that 152 activities to get everything out of the solution. And so the journey was incremental, uh-huh. right? And it was more deliberate. You needed to take a step back and really look, what did we want that end-to-end architecture to look like from day one? Where today, a lot of the struggle with organizations is they're still very siloed, right? You have a group that's focused on perimeter protection. You have an endpoint team that's focused on endpoint security. You have the networking team. You have your SOC NOC team, right? And all of those groups are trying to modernize, but they're doing it a lot of times in a siloed manner. Mm-hmm. And when that happens, it's very difficult to integrate these technologies, and it's hard to get modern solutions that are providing more than just what we used to have, which is you're a router, you're doing routing, right? You're a next-gen firewall, you're just doing next-gen firewall. That's not how technology is coming out anymore. And mm-hmm. so you have to think differently. And mm-hmm. So taking that backside, or like the top level, what do I want my end-to-end architecture be, and then focusing is really key.
Is knocking down those silos a nice to have, or is it a must have? Because it sounds like it's at least very critical, if not a must have.
I would say it's a must have if you want to do it right and at the lowest cost possible. Otherwise, you're going to maybe get there, but it's going to take a lot longer because you're going to maybe stumble along the way. Oh, we just bought this vendor that doesn't integrate with this other vendor.
Right.
Okay, well, we got to wait 5 years before maybe those two can integrate. So I think it will happen. It's just it's a longer journey.
JT, he talked about incrementality, which I think is a word. I'm not sure.
You might have coined something today.
I might have. Write that down. That sounds to me, though, like the most important issue because in terms of transitioning to a Thunderdome type model, this is happening at the same time as every agency is on some type of a modernization journey, which you can't turn off the mission and say, well, we'll come back to you in 18 months when we figured this all out. So that process strikes me as really important when you're trying to fulfill the mission of the agency at the same time that you're trying to do an IT modernization, and then on top of that, this cybersecurity transition.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that when you walk into a customer, right, and it doesn't matter what customer it is, when you walk into a customer and you show them this is everything in the world you can do, and the modernization, right, of technology and the must-have that has to be there. I agree, it's a must-have, right? We can no longer look at the silos, right, that are there. But when you talk about that with the customer and say, this is where you really want to be, it's a daunting task. It scares the living crap out of them. I'm going to be honest with you. It really does, and it's and the reason for it is that they look at it in a multitude of ways. Number one is that I now have to overhaul my entire technical stack across the board. I also have to modernize, right, and deploy something that is net new that my people have never touched. And then number three, I've also got to look at, what's another capital expenditure that's going to come along with this, from a deployment methodology, right? And so a lot of times they think they have to do everything all at once. So that incrementalization, right, the wonderful word that you just coined, is.
I hope so.
I do too, man. It'll be awesome if you get you into Webster's tomorrow. But I think that is big because we have to understand that we can't do it all at once, right? And that gets back to some of that planning I was talking about before. But you have to be able to pick and choose. You have to understand what needs to be done with the technology stack today to be able to modernize that. And then I'll even talk about our partnership with Booz, like what we did with Thunderdome and being able to do rapid deployments at a low cost, right, for customers, primarily DISA, right, for Thunderdome, but be able to do rapid deployments, be able to cut a lot of that capital expenditure that comes along with that. That also helps ease the burden, number one, from that organization, but it also shows that organization too, right, from that incremental setup that they're going to be doing, that incremental feature adoption or product adoption or however that is, it allows them to continue to plan for more to be done at a more rapid rate, right? So it kind of eases that, oh my God, like I've got to replace everything today. No, you can do it, and now we can put that timeline together. And if you have to be at a certain place within 3 to 5 years, we can either guarantee that 3 to 5 year timeline or maybe even exceed that 3 to 5 year timeline and bring you there within 2 to give you better ROI out of your products moving forward.
All right, I want to come back to the tech stack concept and talk about that in a moment, but our first question's in, and since I promised folks we were going to integrate them as we went, I want to keep that promise. The first question is, can you talk about some of the experiences consolidating data, and how can, see, I should have worn my glasses.
I can't read it either.
And we're going to fix that in a second. Thank you. There we go.
Our lovely moderators over here.
Can you talk about some of the experiences correlating data and how this can be leveraged when you have a consolidated approach like this? Either one of you want to take that? You want to talk about that, Michael?
I can start. JT, hit the nail, and I actually heard him do a talk in the spring, and he said visibility is the key. And I'm like, you are speaking my language, because I through this whole journey, right, from a defensive cyber operations perspective, visibility, analytics, and getting the analysts the data that they need is the most important thing. We're doing upwards of just on Versa kind of logs, 3.5 billion logs a day, okay, coming from sensors. an individual cannot humanly view that data, right, and make sense of it. So you need to be able to run analytics across that data set to be able to give what an analyst needs to really focus on and what's a threat actor versus what's normal behavior. Now that's a lot of logs, right? The correlation and capabilities though that we gained when we started introducing a product like Versa and really reducing that tech stack is that you used to have a vendor that was doing your intrusion detection. You had a separate vendor doing your next-gen firewall. You had a separate vendor doing your routing or your SD-WAN capabilities. Each of those generating individual logs, each one having different formats, each one giving a piece of the information, but very difficult to correlate in an analytics platform like a SIM or a big data platform. One thing that we gained was getting all of that correlation out of the box without having to do anything, right? That all happened. This log from this interface hit this intrusion detection rule, and then this firewall, and oh, by the way, it was from this individual user, not just an IP address or a port, but we're getting user context information. So while we're getting many logs, right, we can take all of this additional context and really distill what is important and what isn't.
Mm-hmm. When you talk about that volume of information, 3.5 billion a day, you said?
Yeah.
All right. And you're right, no human or no cadre of humans could process all that. So what's the automation look like? And that, I would also think that no cadre of humans could generate that much. So this is an automaton versus automaton battle that it's becoming, I imagine. Is that fair to say?
It is. So I think as we move to zero trust architectures, you're increasing the number of sensors, the number of policy enforcement points, or you can use the kind of the terms within zero trust, but you're adding security across your end-to-end infrastructure, each of them generating their own logs, right? And so it becomes a death by logs if you're not consuming them and processing them smartly, right? So one of the things that we have within Thunderdome is a smart data analytics pipeline where we're in real time taking these logs, normalizing them to a common format, running inline analytics against those logs. So we're adding additional context on the logs themselves before they get to a platform that's actually performing that log analysis. That way we can, as those logs hit a SIM environment or hit a big data platform, we're able to automatically hit alerts because we've already done that pre-processing of those logs. And that's leveraging AI ML within the pipeline itself.
Mm-hmm. Is this going to become another area, JT, where everybody talks about AI and the impact that it's going to have on both securing, defending, and so on?
So one of the things about AI, so first off, let's I love the term AI. I think it's the buzzword, right, for 2025. Right. It's like zero trust for the last 2 years, right? It's but a lot of people are doubling down in AI, and a lot of people are doing things, with AI that we've never been able to do before. But keep in mind, right, that AI today is still very narrow. It's still very childlike, and we're actually in what is called narrow AI as of right now. So you get basically, you get what you train it to do. It's like a toddler. So to answer your question, yes, it is going to become that, right? There is still we still have to look at the modernization of the technology stack before we start looking at how we apply AI to it. So one of the things that Versa does, and let's talk about the kind of the visibility and what actually the platform will put out, and not try to get too technical with it, but we try to, within our own solution, we try to append tags, right, whether it be flow IDs or however that is. We try to append, tags into the logs itself to be able to help correlate that. So when you start looking at and how you're training AI, it makes it easier for the AI and the ML, right, to be able to take a log, correlate, different factors, be able to see the entire path of the packet, be able to see the entire threat that's coming across, and be able to identify that, whether it be an IOC or an actual threat, or maybe benign, or however that is. So I think one of the big things we got to look at too, and it gets back to my visibility of security. So. Mm-hmm. Being able to tie in the network metrics, being able to tie in the security metrics, being able to append a tag to that says this entire flow is related in some way. That doesn't take AI. that just takes, a singular solution to be able to see the entire packet and correlate that data itself before it goes out to the SIM and before it goes out to the AI engine. From there, you can teach that AI engine very easily to say, hey, find these flow IDs, find these tags that are appended, find the commonality of information, and then piece me together the entire visible spectrum of, did John go in and did he, in some way, shape, or form click on a link inside of his email, right? Pull down a payload. Was the payload blocked by the firewall? Did the payload try to go out and go east-west, but he wasn't able to do that because, he didn't have access to the applications or the resource, right? And then finding everything about me as JT, as John, and saying, look, I know where patient zero is. I've been able to defend patient zero, and I defended patient zero based upon the fact that I had visibility to it. The AI correlates all of that stuff within the SIM, right? And then that is actually able to be handed back out to your security operations team. And now your SOC can go through, whether it's your internal SOC, if it's a managed SOC, however that is, the SOC can then go, right, do threat hunting against that, or even just take immediate remediation depending on what that threat is. So yes, it will take, AI is going to be there. It's going to become, more prevalent, but we still got a ways to go before AI starts doing more than just what we're teaching is basically what I'm saying.
Yeah. One thing, JT, that you laid out there that I think is really helpful is 'cause it gets to the question that one of the viewers has asked about what's a good place to start. And it strikes me that this concept of begin with the end in mind is probably a good place to start, because you want to know, this is when we get to an end state, as Thunderdome has gotten to, 152 out of 152, that's where we want to go. Then you can see what you have, and you talked about basically an inventory is what it sounds like. And then figure out what you need to fill that delta. Am I thinking about it the right way?
Yeah, so there's an old adage that I always grew up with that was you don't pave the road as you cut down the trees. You kind of got to know where the road's going to go, right? And so you map out the road. Does it have to go across a mountain? Is it going across a hill? Does it have to go through a mountain? Do you have to build a bridge? Go build a tunnel? Under a bay somewhere? Like, how do you get there? And you have to plan for that. But you know where the road has to be, and so therefore you can actually go back and you bring that back and start looking at every incremental site. So yes, right. So you're looking at the end and understanding what your end state wants to be, and then looking at those gaps first to say, okay, do I already have the pieces in place that achieve a quarter of this, 3/4 of this, half of this, however that may be? You already know what those pieces are. Then you got to look at what's going to fill in those gaps. The other thing is, and this is where Michael was, talked about earlier, was what happens if I have to fill those gaps, but that doesn't play with a solution that I already have. So now you got to also understand too is that you might fill gaps, but you're going to create new gaps. So you're constantly doing an evaluation, right? For the solution, and then to your point, right? Once I have all those pieces and parts in play, now I have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, how many ever phases I'm going to have to roll something out. I know my timeline, every single year to be able to make that happen. If I can bring things forward, I can, but at least I have the plan and I have the road. Now I go cut down the trees, I can go pave the road.
Yeah. You talked about the organizations in the Defense Department that are already using the Thunderdome solution as in kind of an end state function right now. As you worked with them in implementation, were there common threads in what you found about the gaps that they had and that they needed to fill as they worked toward full implementation, or was each organization, I know there were differences in all of them, but I wonder if there were common threads or if everybody really was on a completely different path?
I think there's a combination of both, right? I think some organizations were in different parts of their zero trust journey. They made different investments, and so how they wanted to start with adopting technologies differed. But they were all trying to achieve very similar goals, right? And so I would say for a majority of them, we're introducing similar technologies, but we are integrating them with different vendors, and to sometimes achieve different mission goals, right? An organization that's focused on one mission set, right, has very different outlook and what's important to them versus another. And so there's definitely differences, and it really, again, goes back to that assessing what you want to achieve, right? When we talk to organizations from a mission perspective, what is your mission and how do you see Zero Trust folding into that mission? And there are organizations that say, there are times where I do not want you to block something because it may affect my mission, right? And so we have to design around that. That doesn't mean you have to necessarily change the technology, but the policies and how those policies are enforced change. And so, yeah, everyone needs a little bit of tailoring, but everyone thinks that they're a snowflake.
Right.
And they're not necessarily, you have to tailor the technologies to meet your mission.
Yeah, and that tailoring sounds like it's possible that would be required for maybe implementation of the same tool, but with a different mission set, a different implementation style or process procedure.
Exactly, yeah. And so, yeah, the rolling out of that technology is generally a lot of the same way to do it. The policies and what is important to an organization, right? So, an example, if a lot of what we're introducing is conditional-based access. I'm taking device attributes, I'm taking a user identity, and the combination of those tell me what is that individual using this particular device able to access. Well, what's running on that device, whether it has disk encryption, what is the EDR, applications are running, those are checks that a lot of organizations are doing. But organization A might have different checks that's important to them versus organization B. That just becomes a policy decision, right? That becomes, what checks am I making? What enforcements do I want to have? And so it's working with those organizations to really understand what's important to them. And
JT, one of the opportunities that I think civilian agencies have here, we talked about this a little bit in the warm-up, is that as they continue with technology modernization, separate from Zero Trust, but kind of tied to them in tandem, whatever the next thing is, AI is currently the next thing, as you mentioned a few moments ago. Whatever the next thing is, this program will be able to kind of flex to fit whatever it is that agencies need to accommodate in the future. Is that a fair observation?
Absolutely. So that's one of the things about when we start looking at consolidation, because when you start consolidating into a singular platform, and I'm right, wrong, or indifferent. There's many different, I would say, theories on. I got to have a defense in depth, so I got to have 35 platforms out there, and there's a lot of people that are now talking about, and analysts are talking about defense in depth and singular platforms and so forth. A singular platform usually is a lot more nimble. When you're starting to look at what is the next thing. So the fewer the vendors that you can have within your environment, the easier it is to start looking at what is the next piece. Because if I have 15 different vendors in my environment, and across the board, right, and studies have been done that there's been as many as when you go talk to a customer, right, whether they're in federal, whether they're in private sector, however it is. You'll find 50 different security vendors sitting at that customer site because they just, no vendor left behind, and I got to have this defense in depth, and I've got to have something going on. And then you're finding out the troubles, right, of getting them integrated. And so the fewer the vendors, it makes it really easy to say, okay, I know that my next step is I want to bring an AI model in. Let's use that for the example we talked about it. I need to bring an AI model in. Can I use the current vendor's, solution and utilize their AI model and depend on their AI model? Do I build my own large language model or small language model to be able to take that information out and do something with it, whether it be actionable or however that is? If I have more and more solutions that are there, it makes it very hard for me to do that, because Michael just hit on it, right? Earlier he said, hey, these things, you got logs, right? Different formats, different things that are coming in those logs. How do I take that visibility? How do I take those configurations that are drastically different? Be able to put that information into a language model and be able to do something actionable with said information. And that goes the same thing for different technologies that you might put in. Maybe we need to have, I do something today with SD-WAN, for instance, and I'm doing secure SD-WAN with next-gen firewalls, and so forth. I need to bring on ZTNA for remote users. I had a legacy solution. Those licenses are going out. What's my next step? bring in a that singular solution that can provide that, guess what? Your logging is now the same. Makes it very easy to adopt that. So in short, right, it's the smaller or the least amount of vendors you can bring in, that as long as they're providing the security and the networking needs that you have, guess what, right? You're going to get everything in the world you want. You're going to get it for a cheaper price too, right? You're going to do one vendor, but you're going to have less overhead with that. But you're going to have an easier adoption the more and more you continue to stack onto that, because that vendor, and that's where I talk about my planning for vendors always, is look at where that vendor is going, understand what they're producing, not just today, but their roadmap tomorrow. Make sure that aligns to your plans, right, as you start doing more and more adoption of new things that you're going to have to bring on later in life.
All right. I think I know the answer to the next question, but I don't know the how or the why. So I'll call on you guys for that. Is this applicable to forward deploy warfighters? I know that DoD leaders talk all the time about edge computing and edge security in getting data to and from the edge, in trying to build basically a constellation of data exchange so that information doesn't have to come from a ship in the Pacific to a plane in the Pacific, or it can go direct from one to the other instead of having to come back to some source. So how does Zero Trust work in an environment like that?
Yeah, so it's definitely critical for those environments, first of all. How to provide it, it's kind of where I was going before, right? We can use a lot of the same technologies. We are deploying some of those technologies like Versa out to the warfighter because it's software defined, right? We can load it on radio systems that have size, weight, and power constraints to be able to provide not only an SD-WAN type of capability where I'm able to use multiple types of links, which is very critical in those environments, right? I might have an LTE, I might have a 5G or a Wi-Fi or nothing at different times, right? And how do I leverage all of those links? How do I maximize my bandwidth? How do I send different data across different paths? How do I operate completely in the dark? Those are things that SD-WAN does a great job of. If we're also providing that security within the same platform to do next-gen firewall, intrusion detection, all those things that you want at the enterprise and are able to get at the edge in a small platform, that's great for those warfighters that need that technology. There are definitely considerations when you're operating in disconnected space. How do you do identity? How do you do the analytics environments? And so a lot of what we're designing for is how do we have small implementations at the edge that then can federate at the enterprise, and you can connect and get log information, cross-cluster searching across analytics environments to be able to participate in the enterprise when you're connected, and how do you operate disconnected in other states. So definitely critical. We're definitely implementing those today, but considerations that need to be had when you're kind of designing those solutions.
JT, I'm struck by the number of civilian agencies that talk about edge computing now and edge data exchange in the same way DoD does. Law enforcement organizations, citizen services of all types.
Border control.
Yeah,
Yep.
all of that. Agriculture department in however many locations all over the country where they're out in the field with farmers and so on. So it's not the same tactical execution, but the implementation is very similar. Is it also similar techniques as far as the deployment?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing is that, so look at it, when you look at it from a warfighter standpoint, there's different means and different mediums in which data has to traverse, right? So whether you're out at a forward base, whether you're out at at a back end base, right? I'm out in the middle of the desert, wherever that may be. There's different ways, right? This is what kind of Michael's talking about. There's different ways and different mediums and different ways to secure that traffic. When you look more to civilian agencies, though, they're going to be using a lot more of those common infrastructures. They're going to be using cell. They're going to be using the hard lines, the more terrestrial data. They may be using satellite at the same time as well. But the implementation, believe it or not, is still a lot the same. It's still data going across a medium. You still have to have zero trust. The data may not be as sensitive because it's more of a civilian agency, but at the end of the day, we still have to look at it and say, wherever you're at, depending upon where you may be geographically, depending upon your user, are you using a tablet versus a laptop, what is on that, making sure that you have the right services turned on, the disk encryption and things of that nature as well. You have to maintain that security for that user wherever they may be. And so once again, right, the implementation becomes, pretty much the same. It's just how do I ride that across that particular type of media? And so utilizing something like ZTNA for remote access, utilizing things like whether it be secure SD-WAN for those offices, the next-gen firewall, doing that segmentation, things of that nature, all of that still resides. But like I said before, it's using more of that common commercial ground, right? And you're not necessarily utilizing, some specialized, communication, satellite, right, or something like that, like the DoD would.
Mm-hmm. And I think in the past, a lot of the focus was on transport. How do I get connectivity out to these places? With our adversaries targeting our infrastructure, right, we really need, from an IT and OT perspective, there's a lot bigger focus on how do I also drive security out to the edge as well.
Mm-hmm. We focused a lot on how we got to where we are today and where we are today. And I want to finish, as we start to run out of time, on what the future looks like, at least to the degree that we can think about it and talk about it. And you alluded to the fact that the adversary gets a vote. They have an influence on how we will want to defend and how we will want to evolve systems moving forward. What's over the horizon in your view? Everybody implementing a zero trust solution by fiscal 27 is a great goal, but it's not the end of the zero trust journey, I imagine.
Yeah, so I think there's a few things. We touched on AI earlier as a defensive mechanism. I mean, we have to realize that our adversaries are using AI right now to find new ways to penetrate, right? There's going to be a lot more 0 days coming out, and so they're not standing by while we try to get stuff deployed within 2027, right? And so we need to continue to evolve, and I think as we get more modern commercial solutions into the environment that have the ability to introduce these newer technologies through common orchestration perspective, right? We're not just doing 5-year tech refreshes of the same networking platform, okay, after the next generation, right? We need to be continuously pushing out new capabilities. And I think organizations, there was a discussion about vendor roadmaps, right? I think organizations really need to understand and push the vendor community. What is your roadmap? What is your vision? If I introduce this tomorrow, next year, what capabilities are you planning on producing that maybe I don't introduce today, but I'm going to have those tomorrow, right? And so I think there's going to be a lot more focus as we look at efficiencies. Vendor selection needs to be at the top of people's minds and making sure that they're introducing new capabilities.
Mm-hmm. How do you help somebody walk through the idea of, we talked about knowing what you have, knowing where you want to go, and yet since there's not an end state and with no crystal ball,
yep,
we can't anticipate what the future holds. But how do you help folks evaluate how to build a system that will be flexible enough to introduce the new technologies that we talked about earlier?
So one of the things, right, and I'll tag in on that on the AI side really quick, right? And so I think it was, from the classic movie, Terminator. It's like August 22nd of 2025, right? Skynet started learning at a geometric rate. Look, it's you've got to start, understanding what's going on today, right? And start looking at where threats are coming from, how they're being developed. We just said it, right? It's like, Michael's 100% on point. AI is being used to develop threats. They're being able to exploit, 0 days that people are going through. And because guess what, right? We talked about it before in logs. I get, X amount of logs. No human can look through that. I have X amount of code. No human can look through this. I need to go try to target anything and everything I can, whether it be from a security vendor, a networking vendor. I can't do that. So look at where people are, or look at how people are developing these threats, these 0 days, exploiting them. They're using AI and so forth, from that aspect. And that's just to the day model, right? So understand what's coming down the path. You said it, we don't have a crystal ball. We can't predict it. But we can get a great understanding of where things are going to be, right? And we can make great hypotheticals over the course of the next 3 to 5 years of where things are going to be happening, how they're going to be happening, how I'm going to get attacked, what my network is going to look like, how my infrastructure is going to be impacted by this, right? And that can help start setting the tone. And so I walk a lot of customers through that and help them understand from a security perspective, primarily, once again, where the threat's going to come from. They're not going to come from nation states any longer, right? We know that they're coming from different countries, but are they nation state attacks, or are they group of attackers that are just coming in and doing something malicious to your environment? The other aspect of that is you got to understand too, it's like we're doing more and more. It's more, around data, how we're transporting our data. What's our infrastructure going to start looking like? And so what's our bandwidth needs and so forth. And as we grow bandwidth, that right there becomes a prime target, because guess what? Someone's shooting a lot of data in and out of their network, right, at any given point in time. So guess what? I got to start looking at it from a perspective of, if I'm a threat actor, that might be something I need to go attack. So, this is, once again, right, getting that security team, getting that networking team, right, getting your systems team and so forth, getting them on the same page of where this is really going to be, because every group has their own different mentality because they look at things completely different. So you got to drive that, get them on the same page, right? Like I said, get them knowing where things are going to be coming from, where they need to be in that 3 to 5 year. And you draw a draft. It's not a hard set plan. It's never a hard set plan. And guess what? I've got customers today that implemented something 2 years ago and it's obsolete now. You know what? That's okay. It's okay to admit that, because things are happening at such a rapid rate that it's very hard for some vendors, number one, to keep up, but a vendor that had a solution 2 years ago, that whole solution could be obsolete because that threat no longer even exists, because other vendors have already turned around and said, hey, look, we're going to go ahead and patch for that. It's okay to understand that, but you've got to, once again, right, start looking at and being able to accept, what do I have? Where am I going to go? Where things are going to be coming from? How is this going to affect the gaps in which I'm trying to fill today, right? And making sure that you're able to have a flexible plan to be able to adjust for threats, for the environment, for the economy, for everything moving forward, to say, okay, I can still get to where I need to be, right? And I may have different options and different avenues to be able to get there.
JT, we're starting to run out of time, and I'm going to ask you the same question in a moment, so I'll give you a chance to listen and think. I'm going to put him on the spot.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it.
I knew you would appreciate it. We've gotten great questions from the audience, and we've covered a lot of ground. Is there anything that we missed that the folks that are watching should know about what they might have to deal with as they dig into Zero Trust, as they try to leverage the Thunderdome model in their individual agencies that we haven't covered so far?
So I will say there's probably 80,000 things, right, we can talk about, that we haven't covered. I think one of the big things, though, that we need to, and I'll circle back around to this, is I can't speak enough about proper planning. And it's and being flexible with proper planning is huge. And I would say, with that, right, we also have to understand, when we start deploying these models, and a lot of times I'll talk to customers and it's like, oh, price wins, every single time. And so it's not necessarily just looking at it from a price perspective. It's also looking at it from the operational overhead. What's it going to take to consume the product? What's it going to take to consume the entire solution? Understanding how your teams are going to be able to adopt this and be able to run with it. Because I could get a cheap solution in tomorrow, right? But if my team has no clue how to ingest the logs and ingest the data that's coming out of that solution, it could be 3 years before I find my first IOC, and it could have been there 3 years earlier. So you have to look at and do the proper planning of the solution that a team can adopt, that a team can utilize. You've got to also, and I talk about it really big, and once again, right, there's different premises around this, but consolidation is huge. Being able to get a singular platform to give you actionable data versus 15, right, or 10, or even 5 platforms to try to give you data that you have to consolidate and correlate to be actionable, right, is going to save you time, money, effort, everything. And so It really comes back down to, like I said, proper planning, right? Flexibility within that planning, understanding where your needs are, and then moving forward with that, right? And especially in today's economy, where we know we're going to be, where we're reducing cost, right, everywhere. Like, how do I still get my functionality that I need within my platform, and how do I carry that forward, right, and still continue to grow that?
Michael, what didn't we hit on yet that we should before we close?
Yeah, well, I think we covered a lot. JT was covering, I think, good areas there. I want to, foot stomp on the operations side. I don't think we spent a ton of time on operations. We talked about implementation. So I guess on the implementation side, before I get to operations, there's having the right technical solutions in place and the right architecture, but then there's also coverage, right? I think I talked to some organizations and they're like, well, we have this SOAR tool. Okay, and how are you using? How many use cases are you using? And what automations have you done? Well, we have this one use case that focuses on our email triaging, and that's great. You have the tool. You're doing a use case. You're automating a capability. But if you're not automating everything, right, you're not done, right? And you asked about where are you done? The coverage is very important. How are we taking the technology that we've invested in, that we've integrated into our environment? How are we making sure that we're leveraging that tool to the best capability? A lot of tools are in organizations that are being utilized 20% of the feature sets or the capabilities they have. So both the coverage and utilization, I think, will greatly help organizations leverage those platforms to their fullest. So being able to scale stuff out is important. I think the other thing from an operations perspective, both from helping consolidate the tool sets that you're operating with. How are you, centralizing your automation and orchestration to really manage these platforms, right? If we're really pushing security out to the edge as much as we can, you're ending up with more devices, more sensors. It needs to be done in a way that you're using templates. You're pushing out, through an automation and orchestration capability where, it's no more someone's going into every single box through CLI and trying to update the firewall policy or the networking policy, right? To be able to do this at scale, you need to have solutions that can operate at scale. I think the last piece that we didn't touch on at all and is somewhat unique to different environments, but one of the big things that we were doing within Thunderdome as we were supporting DISA, who's a service provider, right? A big capability that we looked at was multi-tenancy. How do we support from a platform different organizations that may want to manage their own policies, but we can also push down higher level policies and directives. The civil federal government has a lot of similar organization sets where they can leverage multi-tenancy. So if that's something that's definitely important to your organization and having different groups manage different pieces, whether you're siloed or there's different organizations that you want to be able to provide, that multi-tenancy might be important from a technology perspective.
I really appreciate both of you taking time to talk to me today and talk to the viewers about what's going on. Michael, JT, appreciate you being here. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm going to hand things back over to Erica now.
Thank you, Francis and JT and Michael, for being with us this afternoon. I want to thank all of our participants who joined us today. We hope this webinar has been helpful for you and your organization.